Good evening. This is Chair Haggerty, welcoming everyone to our visual, I guess it's visual, it doesn't want to be, but I need to read this to you. The teleconference audio can be accessed by dialing toll-free number 1-855-797-9485. Enter access code 145-425-8848 to access the call. And when requested, enter number or hashtag. And through the audio will be found at youtube.com/GoEPCC. Any member of the public wishing to make a comment or question regarding an agenda item can email comments or questions to the following email address: board-question@epcc.edu. All backup and related materials can be accessed at the following link: epcc.edu/administration/board of trustees. Bell, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Upchurch?
Here.
Ms. Sanchez?
Here.
Mrs. Robles?
Present.
Ms. Nájera? Ms. Nájera? Ms. Pina?
Present.
Dr. Graham? Present. Mr. Haggerty?
Present. We do have a forum, so we're going to go to our first item. Could you please read number 1.7.1?
1.7, presentations by individuals, groups, and organizations. 1.7.1, Ms. Josette Shaughnessy, Vice President of Financial and Administrative Operations, will provide an update on the development of the 2020-2021 fiscal year budget.
Ms. Shaughnessy, are you there?
I am here, Mr. Haggerty. Can you see the presentation?
You have the floor.
Thank you, sir. And you can all see the presentations, correct?
No,
It's not on the screen yet, Ms. Shaughnessy.
you don't see anything on the screen
okay.
except JS.
There it is.
Okay, so we got it.
Very good. This is not. Let's go back. Try to go back. So this one is not advanced. If you go back, please. I guess you can leave it right here. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Good afternoon or good evening, Mr. Haggerty, Dr. Serrata, members of the board, and my colleagues that are listening to this call and members of the listening audience. We are close to the home stretch, although Ms. Tellez does not quite agree with it, but this has been a long, tedious process, and we certainly appreciate your attention to this presentation. The purpose of this presentation is to actually update you. Last time that we had a budget workshop to the board was on June the 11th. So quite a few things have happened since then. We have refined the numbers, and we certainly want to, we have added some information for you. We realize this is a lot of information. So as I am proceeding with the presentation and with the agenda, certainly you are welcome to interrupt me. That I know it's if you want, I can go through each slide and I will pause after each slide, but certainly during the explanation of each slide, if you have a question, please feel free to interrupt me. I'm going to be assisted here by Ms. Laura Tellez, our Director of Budgets, and Mr. Fernie Flores, who is our Associate Vice President for Budget and Financial Services. And certainly they can respond to any questions that I may not be able to address that is posed by the board. So just the purpose of this presentation, again, is to remind you, we're going to have some updates, strategic planning for fiscal year 2021. We're going to update you on the Karzak funding, let you know where we're at, certainly giving you an idea of how we're going to end the fiscal year, which is obviously very important in terms of projected revenue and the budget, and then update you on the fiscal year 2021 projected revenue and the preliminary budget. Then we'll move on to the budget strategies that we've been formulating now for the past 2 budget workshops. That's certainly going to pave the way for a final proposed budget. This is the goal, is that on August the 26th of the next board meeting, that we'll be presenting to you a balanced budget based on any of these budget strategies based on the enrollment situation. And then we will conclude with the next steps. So in terms of strategic planning for next year, so obviously it has not been an easy process, as you know. All community colleges are in the same boat as we are. And so for fiscal year 2021, planning obviously was more important than ever, because really this year was a perfect storm. All sources of revenue were impacted, except maybe for one. But as I had updated the board in June, our appropriation actually remained untouched, when originally we thought they were going to be affected anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20%. Fortunately, Governor Abbott exempted Texas community colleges from the mandated budget reduction. So therefore, the strategies that you're going to be seeing in a while that I already presented back in June are based on this year's state appropriation. So that was really the good news. The not so good news is we are anticipating a potential state funding reduction for the next biennium, which would cover fiscal years 21-22, 22-23. So we're really looking at some challenges here for the next 3 years. And this is in light of the current economic crisis. Was there a question? So
I was just sneezing. Go ahead.
So in addition, the potential lower enrollment during the base year, because we are in the middle of the base year, which started really the mini-semester of spring, summer of 2020, fall 2020, and spring 2021. This is the time period during which our state appropriation, this is during the time we do certify contact hours that are going to be evaluated for state funding. So that could affect next biennium, of course. As we know, the 87th legislature is coming up and is supposed to convene in January of 2021. We also have to plan for an enrollment decrease in the non-dual credit students during fall 2020 and spring 2021. And this is as a result of the continued health crisis. As of today, I believe we were down in credit hours about 18%. In terms of enrollment, I think it was about, anywhere, I think 19 or 20%. So our budget strategies are actually considering that kind of enrollment decrease. Now, that could be mitigated between now and August, until the classes start on August the 24th. We do have some ongoing student calling campaigns that were actually very successful in the summer. So we hope that we'll be able to close that gap, or at least close some of the gap. But we need to prepare for a potential decrease about 20%. That could be mitigated by the expected high unemployment, which we know is going on certainly in the entire nation, and possibly our students staying closer to home and choosing to come to El Paso Community College. We also need to plan for lower property tax collection during fiscal year 2021. We know that the economic downturn for many businesses certainly has made it very difficult for businesses that do not have any revenue coming in terms of their ability to pay property taxes on a timely basis. So we need to plan for a potential reserve to be set aside in case that those taxpayers are not able to pay their property tax on time. We have to plan for lower interest income, which we know we already have experienced this year to the tune of about $1 million decrease in our interest income revenue. And so if you're saying that last September we were at 2% in terms of Fed fund rates, and now we're down to 0 to 0.25%, it is significant impact on our interest income, especially in our government pools. That's where we are invested. Planning for higher unfunded liability related to the implementation of GASB 68 and 75, and that's due to the unfavorable investment market. We anticipate that for the end of this fiscal year, we will not be impacted as much because the measurement period by the state is the previous fiscal year during which investment market was doing very well. But we certainly should anticipate probably a higher unfunded liability at the end of 2021 and certainly 21-22. So in response to obviously the current economic crisis and some of the challenges that I've just mentioned, the college did implement some cost containment measures because we wanted to be prepared for any kind of a potential revenue deficit. And so the first thing we did, and that was really for first and foremost for the safety of our employees, was to cancel travel until further notice. Certainly that is also going to be the case anyway, because we're going to have to decrease our travel budget in response to having to fund some of the deficit. We halted the recruitment of vacant full-time positions unless it's critical. We have scrutinized the need, or we are scrutinizing the need for part-time staff. We have postponed non-master plan and non-critical construction project unless necessary or because it makes sense for us to do that next year. We are postponing non-critical capital equipment purchases. We are scrutinizing the procurement of goods and services for essential need. And this was mentioned last time. This is a kind of a task here that the vice presidents have to undertake, is to review those requisitions that are coming their way and really reviewing for any essential need. We are holding off on hotel reservations of large group for a very good reason, again, because we are right now, the health crisis does mandate that. And then we continue to identify any budget savings to help mitigate any potential revenue deficit. So an update on the Karzak funding. So there was a silver lining, if you will, because really with this funding, we were able to help students tremendously. And so just an update, because you all have already heard about the Karzak funding, the purpose of it, but $8.3 million is going to be distributed directly to students. And so we had a plan, which was to distribute 30% for spring semester students, 30% for summer semester students, and 30% for the fall semester. And then the remaining 10% was going to be available for any additional demand during the academic year. So the 30% that we had set aside for the spring semester students was fully expended to the tune of over $2.5 million. And that served 3,518 students that were approved. For the summer semester, we distributed over $1.6 million, and that benefited over 2,300 students. And that process closed on July the 2nd. We did not expend 30% of it, but that certainly can roll over now to our fall semester students. And as of August the 7th, we have distributed over $1.1 million to 1,522 approved students. So that's certainly, I know as of today, that amount has gone up. But as the time of printing or preparing the presentation, this is where we were at.
This is Chair Haggerty, Joseph. If you have 30% in the spring, 30% in the summer, and 30% in the fall, why is there a difference of, I don't know, almost $900,000 between the funding in the spring and the summer, if they're both 30%? Why isn't it all 2.5, 2.5, 2.5?
Well, the reason why is because it was based on the number of applications that we received and the number of students who applied. So, and maybe this is something maybe that Dr. Gonzalez can certainly respond to much better. But my understanding is that as of July the 2nd, since we did not have additional applications for the summer semester, because summer semester was pretty much completed or was pretty much ongoing, was the second summer session was really already underway as of July the 2nd. So there were no more applications submitted for the summer. Therefore, that process was closed, and that is going to benefit then the fall semester. Did that answer your question, sir?
No, it's doesn't answer my question. Where does the excess money go? Does it stay in the account?
It does. Chair, this is William. So what we did is this was our estimation of the demand. And so what we had anticipated was that we would see approximately by the time the federal government released the funds and we received them, it was 1 week prior to the end of the spring term. And so we had said, preliminarily, we're going to try to distribute the funds that we received, 30% for the spring, 30% for the summer, 30% for the fall, and the remaining 10% for the spring of 2021. We exceeded actually 30% for the spring. In 2 days, financial aid distributed just under $1.9 million, just over $1.9 million. And so we kept it open through that remaining week. We were able to disperse over 30%, about $2.5 million. Summer, we did not see the same demand. The number of applications, and you have to qualify for the CARES Act. You have to have been eligible to receive FAFSA and then be in good academic standings, satisfactory academic progress, as well as reasonable academic progress. We didn't see the same demand. So the 1.6 was about almost 900,000 less, Judge. That will continue. So that stays. So we still have approximately $3 million that we can distribute. We're going to continue to work with fall students. So that 1,522, we may have more. Part of the issue is with the federal government, they now have to reapply for FAFSA. So in the spring and summer, they could use last year's FAFSA application, financial aid application. And for the fall, they have to reapply. So mind you, they don't have to qualify for financial aid, but they have to be eligible to apply for financial aid. So the remaining dollars we still have, and we will carry those over for the fall. And they can continue to qualify throughout the fall term. And then whatever's remaining, we will use for the spring of 21.
So there's no time limit?
There is a 1-year time limit from when we downloaded the funds, which was the last week of the spring term. So approximately the week of April the 23rd of this year. So by April 23rd of next year, approximately, we will have to have utilized all those resources.
So that's going to happen.
We're going to work to spend every single penny. We're going to make sure that our students receive this on the student side, and then we're going to work hard on the institutional side to be able to utilize those. Part of the issue was every time we asked for clarification from the federal government, from the Department of Education, they became more stringent in their interpretation of how these funds could be used. And so it's made it harder for us to distribute them to students.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
You're welcome.
I have a question, Mrs. Carmen. We couldn't work to use some of the money to create a student support system or center?
Dr. Graham, it's a great question. That would be on the institutional side of the resources. And unfortunately, anything that is deemed as recruitment is not allowed to be used. Not allowed to spend deemed recruitment. I'll give you an example on one of them. Face coverings. We ordered 1,000 face coverings for our 3,000 employees. So every employee would receive 2, one plain one and one with the EPCC logo. We're not able to claim the EPCC logo because they see that as recruitment. So we're going to pay for the EPCC logo, whatever that cost us. I can't remember, $700 or $800 out of institutional resources, and just charge the CARES Act, the mask itself. They're very stringent on how we can use these resources, and Ms. Shaughnessy and her team are protecting the institution, diligently monitoring any expense that we're eligible to utilize for that. As much as it makes sense, and I agree with you, Dr. Graham, it makes so much sense to have some sort of student support network for students beyond what we already have, just on transition and everything online and the kinds of issues that students are having. But that is deemed a recruitment effort from the federal government, and we cannot use the resources in that fashion.
Hi, this is Christina. I do have a question on that with regards to the CARES Act funding and I guess the criteria. So Dr. Serrata, you had mentioned earlier that they have become more stringent in their regulations or their feedback and the guidance that they're providing to the community college. Can you just elaborate a little bit more in terms of what they have since clarified are eligible or ineligible fund?
Sure.
Funding?
I'll start in a broad, thank you, Ms. Sanchez. I'll start in a broad umbrella, and then I'll allow Ms. Shaughnessy, among others, to chime in. But initially, when the CARES Act was being drafted by Congress, the intent was that all students that were enrolled would be eligible, including, for example, DACA students. That was everyone that I've spoken to at the national level as well as at the state level. So American Association of Community Colleges, that's David Bain, who's the Senior Vice President for Government Relations, Terry Hartle from the Association of College Education Council, the Association of Council of Education. They indicated that the intent of Congress was that those resources could even be capitalized and utilized by DACA students. Secretary DeVos and her team indicated that that was not the case. And so, for instance, they had to have qualified, they changed the rules, or the interpretation rather, that they had to be eligible for federal financial aid. That eligibility process eliminated all DACA students because you can only apply for federal financial aid. Eligibility is based on citizenship. And so that eliminated that complete segment of students. The state of California and the state of Washington sued, and the injunction is allowing only those two states to distribute CARES Act funding to DACA students. The rest of us, the other 48, are not allowed to. There was additional requests and clarifications, and so as we went through those, and at the federal level and at the national level, as AACC and many of us requested this information, the information that they continue to put out via their frequently asked questions on their websites, it became more and more stringent. That's an example.
Yeah. So, Dr. Serrata, real quickly. So, I know earlier you had mentioned that we had purchased a certain set of PPE, and then we purchased another set of PPE with a logo, and then we ended up having, I guess, to pay for that. And I guess the only comment I would have is that and I know that the group at the community college is reviewing the criteria and the eligibility, but that really to be sure as much as we can and to get that guidance as much as we can so that we're not spending our own funds, right? Not CARES federal funding for something that we might have thought could have been covered. And then at the back end, we're going to have to put that up later. So I'm just concerned on that, knowing that we're going through a budget deficit. So I guess, to the extent that we can get as much guidance as possible so that we can understand and know that how to appropriately use those funds would be good. Because I'm just, we didn't have to, I guess in my mind, I think we didn't have to necessarily go out to purchase those masks with the logo, and then here we are having to pay for it. Every penny counts, I think, now and as we move forward. And so to the extent that we could be as prudent and sure that those funds are being appropriately used, I would definitely urge that as much as possible. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. It's really good direction, and we have done that. That was the one example that I wanted to provide to the board. It cost us a few $100s, and you're absolutely right. At this point, every single dollar counts. We're making sure that we do that. Shaughnessy and her team have been scrutinizing every expense, and we're making sure that that those are eligible. But it was an example that you're absolutely correct. Ms. Shaughnessy, please, if there's other items, and there's many others, we also provide to the state monthly. Ms. Shaughnessy and her team send to the Legislative Budget Board a report that shows the resources and how those dollars are being expended as well.
And I certainly would like to add to Dr. Serrata and Ms. Sanchez. I can tell you that the scrutinizing process is certainly a very important one. Mr. Bob Elliott in the grants office certainly assist us with that to make sure that whatever we charge to the CARES grant is actually authorized. And we have excellent, we ask for very good justification If a requisition does not contain that justification, we kick it back to the budget head and ask them to provide that justification. Just saying, COVID-19 expense related is just not good enough. You have to actually explain why is it that you need that. And so in some cases, we found out that that expense was really for recruitment, for example, and we said, sorry, that cannot be funded because obviously we are going to be eventually audited and we want to make sure that we are crossing our T's and dotting our I's. And so Mr. Flores and his team in accounting, a very tedious process. I can tell you that this has added a lot of working hours to the staff because we're having to comply with those requirements. But I also would add that in addition to that, we also want to make sure we make good use of those funds. In other words, we don't want to leave anything on the table, Ms. Sanchez. We want to make sure that we are scrutinizing those expenses. If there's any chance that they can be funded by the CARES Act and still being, frugal, we want to make sure that the operating budget is not absorbing those costs. And so we reach out to our colleagues in Texas. In fact, right now there is we're still kind of confused about what the institutional aid part of that CARES funding can do. It's again, as Dr. Serrata mentioned, they've been very strict about covering any recruitment effort and that kind of thing, but also when it comes down to lost revenue. So we know we're going to have some significant lost revenue as a result of the health crisis. And so we are making concerted efforts to make sure we track those lost revenue. And unfortunately, and I reached out to my colleagues again today in Texas, and they're probably tired of seeing my emails and asking the same question. Can we or cannot we fund or can we cover lost revenue with the institutional aid portion of the CARES Act? And it seems like pretty much most of the answers that I'm getting is no, we cannot. But the MSI can.
I was just going to say, I'd be surprised if they would include or be amenable to including the revenue. I know, at least for local grants and even statewide grants, that's not contemplated that those would be used for revenue. But then the only other thing then I would add, I don't want to stop the flow of the presentation, but then if we know, and we do know at this point at least, that some of these expenditures, we're trying to get as much guidance as we can. We're doing our best to figure this out. Then maybe, and I'm sure you already do, I would imagine, at least have been able to budget then and set aside money, right? So that in the event that it comes back or whatever audit comes back to say that those funds have not been, they're not in line with being, CARES Act eligible, that at least we've been able to budget for that. That's all I would add, just that we're prepared for that. In this case, it was a couple of $100 for the mask, not to diminish that. That's just as important, but for anything else as we go forward with that, that's all I would just, urge that we do.
Absolutely, Ms. Sanchez. And I can tell you the conversations we've had with Mr. Elliott is that this is not just like a free-for-all kind of funding. We do want to get reimbursed for what we think is very, very important, but at the same time, we don't want people to just be spending money thinking they're going to get reimbursed by the CARES Act. I mean, that's the one message that we have. We have certainly communicated that we still need to be frugal. This is not just free money. It is money that needs to be spent very wisely. The LBB, the survey to the LBB that I send on a monthly basis, they do ask you to report the expenses that are year to date, and then they're asking you to project by the end of the fiscal year. So they started doing that in April. As soon as this crisis hit, the LBB requested a report from us. And so we had to kind of pretty much try to estimate the best we could what those expenses could be. At the same time as the summer progressed, and we were able to track those expenses now through our accounting system, and we're able to obviously record them in a proper account or fund. And then for the new fiscal year, I've already reached out to our vice president and said, what are we looking at for next year? We need to get an idea here. What is it that you're going to need that can be funded by the CARES Act, and we make sure that the funding is allocated in the right way. So certainly right now we're pretty much reacting to the current situation, trying to get the budget passed and all of that. But certainly there's a concerted effort in looking at what is we're going to need for next year and how we're going to allocate it in the most prudent, as you mentioned, and the most frugal manner.
Thank you, Ms. Shaughnessy.
Absolutely. My pleasure. So right now, with the institutional aid of $8.3 million, so far, a little bit over $1.6 million has been charged to the grant. In other words, these are expenses that have been vetted by Mr. Elliott and Mr. Flores and basically have good justification to be charged to the grant. So if and when we do get audited, we have very good documentation that justifies the charging of those expenses to the grant. Outside of that, we also have some expenses that are still in institutional budget because at the beginning we did not have a fund that had been created yet until we understood the process. And so we're in a process of reviewing those expenses. And by the end of the fiscal year, those expenses will either stay in institutional budget because they do not qualify, or they will be reclassified to the grant fund. So there's a lot of work to be done. We won't close our fiscal year books until we're probably looking at the first week of October, but I would say probably the middle of October at the latest, because we have so much work ahead of us between now and the time that we close the fiscal year. As I mentioned, the process is ongoing to reclassify those expenses. And we've been looking at tracking all technologies, hardware, software. Every month I send an email to Dr. Hiron and say, hey, what do you have coming up? Do you have anything that is projected for the end of the fiscal year? If not, what are you looking at for next year? We're tracking any refunds, because the refunds, we can actually fund the refunds that were made to the students because of a class cancellation to that institutional aid. But we cannot fund any revenue because we did not get the enrollment that we anticipated because of COVID-19. So all costs incurred in assisting employees and working remotely from home, we've been tracking that. We're also tracking any obviously related costs dealing with personal, PPE and sanitary products. Any questions on this particular slide? So the MSI funding, because we are a minority serving institution, we received a little bit of $1 million. And that's the one we wish was a little higher, because when you look at any lost revenue that we have experienced, distance education fee. For the summer, we waived about $180,000 worth of distance education fee. We have lost revenue on continuing education tuition, because a lot of those classes are held face-to-face. They were not able to be obviously administered through online. So we've lost quite a bit of tuition for the summer. Auxiliary fund commissions. So all our vendors, I had mentioned earlier, all our vendors, so your food services, your beverage, your snack machines, bookstore commissions, because of those sales going down, then that, and as you will see in a little while, we still have a budget to fund. And so those auxiliary fund commissions actually are eligible to be reimbursed by the MSI funding. The biggie here is also vehicle registration fee revenue. So under normal circumstances, the vehicle registration fee that is assessed for students who purchase a decal generates a little bit over $800,000 a year. So with having no employees, hardly not too many students on campus, we are not charging for that. However, though, the plan is to charge as we have a staggered return on campus. But we're talking here about, $500,000 a year or $600,000 that we are not going to be able to budget for next year. But yet, Chief Ramirez still has to fund his personnel that is administering the safety on our campuses. And so we could, and I'll have some suggestions later on how we can fund that vehicle, that lost revenue. But it's going to be really hard because there's a lot of competition here for that $1,041,000. And so we'll have to decide here whose best interest it is to fund it through the CARES Act funding. Any questions on this? Thank you. So the other update we wanted to provide is on our revenue projections for this fiscal year. Now, the good news here is because COVID-19, as much as it can, not really good news, but it did really impact this community college really at the end of the spring semester. So we already had collected quite a bit of our tuition and fees, except for the distance ed that I mentioned earlier. We already had collected a lot of our property taxes. And so those are not as impacted as, let's say, for example, the other income. So last time that I presented, this revenue was about what you see here for the total operating revenue of $142.6 million, or a decrease about $758,000 over what we had projected to fund this year's budget. Here, what you see is that our tuition and fees are impacted by $1.4 million. It does include some downward decrease in tuition revenue from continuing education courses. But we also have, as I will talk about in just a minute, we continue to have a shift in enrollment demographics. So as we do open more early college high schools, as we have more dual credit students that continue our programs, which, by the way, is extremely bodes very well for the college, because we do get contact hours for those students, and we also get student success points that is related to those programs. However, because there is a shift in those early college high school students and dual credit students, that population continues to increase. But we don't have a corresponding increase in our non-dual credit or early college high school students. So that's why you're going to see here an adjustment to the tuition revenue as compared to what we had forecasted to cover the adopted budget this year. The big change here that I wanted to cover is last time that I presented, we had reflected the revenue from the self-supporting program as the same amount. However, and I had mentioned that was still under review. So now that we have a better idea of our self-supporting program, we decided to revise that number down. Now, remember, self-supporting program, those programs cannot expand anything unless the revenue comes in. So technically, the self-supporting program, if they bring in $1.2 million in revenue, it should not be more than $1.2 million that is being expended. Now, the self-supporting program, just like the continuing education program, did suffer some decrease in revenue due to COVID-19 because we had to do refunds, but yet we still incurred more or less the same expenses. So this is something that we are actually reviewing for next year. But going forward, you're going to see here a budget that we're going to be proposing for next year that's going to be revised down from $4.4 million to actually $3 million. And so overall, it really does not impact the total operating budget, but it certainly impacts the self-supporting program. And we'll still have some kind of a reserve as we revise those numbers down. We'll still have some kind of a reserve in case that we have new programs coming on board that will give them the capacity to fund those programs. But here it's really a revision to reflect the reality of those programs. Now, as we get additional grants from TWC or other grants that actually are supplemented by those self-supporting programs, that number probably will rise. But right now, we just want to reflect that as being the reality. So here for next fiscal year, for this fiscal year, we're looking at under operating just a little bit under $800,000 deficit for our total operating revenue. And in the self-supporting program, we're looking at a decrease of about $3.1 million. But again, that does not really impact us tremendously because when we go to the next slide, you're going to see that we are keeping those expenses down. So this slide here reflects what kind of fund balance are we looking at? What kind of increase in fund balance are we looking at the end of this fiscal year? So when we close our books, we will have a fund balance. That's what we anticipate. And again, as a reminder, the fund balance represents the excess of revenue over expenses. So here, the revenue for this coming year is forecasted at $143.9 million, but the expenses are forecasted at $135.4 million, or, significant budget surplus here. So when we look at what does it mean in terms of fund balance, we're looking at adding $8.5 million to the fund balance. And actually, we believe this number is fairly conservative because we have not made an assessment of other budgets that probably have significant savings. Maybe we have savings in part-time staff. Maybe we have savings, for sure we'll have savings in the travel budget. So the 8.5 is actually very conservative. We think that actually the increase in fund balance will be higher than that, which bodes very well to getting us started for next fiscal year. The certain savings that we have that you will see will be used to fund next fiscal year is our salary savings from vacancies. So we're talking about $5 million, and you see that reflected at the bottom of this slide. So over $5 million estimated as of 7/31 in salary savings. We have a biennium reserve that we have not touched, $1.9 million. Because we had a decrease in enrollment, we also have a savings of part-time faculty salaries. We have less sections that are being taught, therefore we're going to have a savings there. And then we have a savings in our institutional clearing, and that is really a contingency fund that does not necessarily transfer from one year to the next, depending on when we balance the budget, whatever is, because we had additional savings somehow, then we end up having a surplus here that we just put in as an institutional clearing. And that amount is used during the fiscal year if something comes up and we need to fund something on a permanent basis. So again, we are looking at some really good results by the end of the fiscal year. And this, by the way, was communicated to our rating agencies yesterday during their rating call. So what is the basis now for the 2021 revenue projections? So some of the things that you see here is pretty much repeated from last time we presented. However, there's some new information here, or some updated information, shall I say. So as I mentioned earlier, our state appropriation is going to be based on the second year of the biennium funding. And we know, we hope we're going to get that money because they sent us a report today about the payments they anticipate to make next fiscal year. So that's the good news. The fact that they're sending us a schedule of payment for next year is good news. The tuition is going to be based on flat enrollment. So this is going to be the best case scenario, by the way, when we're going to be talking about this in just a little while. The tuition is based on flat enrollment, meaning this year's enrollment, and the tuition rate that was approved by the Board of Trustees back in February that is effective this fall. Now, as I mentioned, the tuition revenue is still impacted by the shift in enrollment demographics. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about why that is. And again, this is just to kind of make you aware of why is it that you see where we have to revise, sometimes we have to revise our tuition revenue, is to really reflect the reality. Revenue from tuition and fees, as I mentioned earlier, we have to decrease them by the distance education fee to account for the fee waiver. So in the past, in the fall, we generated about $700,000 in distance education fee. And because we are waiving due to the shift to mostly online instruction, we felt like that was the right thing to do, was to waive that fee. But it is an impact on the budget. I mentioned earlier that the tuition from continuing education courses has been adjusted downward, and that's about $400,000 difference. Now, if we're able to resume those classes, then so be it. We'll have a windfall. But right now, it is adjusted to be more conservative. Property tax revenue. So property tax revenue last time I presented was based on a preliminary valuation, what we used to be called the effective tax rate. And at the time, we did not have a lot of information from the CAD. What has happened, and I'll talk about that in just a little while to kind of illustrate what has happened with the no new revenue tax rate. So the certified taxable valuation, $46.1 billion as compared to $45.3 billion last year. That includes about a little bit over $770 million in new property. So that went down a little bit. In the past, we've had a little bit more like 800 million, but it went down a little bit. And so when we consider this valuation, and now we having to adopt, or the county had to actually apply a new calculation for what we call the no new revenue tax rate, the NNR. And it used to be called the effective tax rate. This was as a result of Senate Bill 2, if you recall, from the 86 legislature. And not only do we have to contend with a rather challenging budget this year, but we also had to contend with some new rules in terms of publishing our tax notices, in terms of calculating that no new revenue tax rate. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. So now the no new revenue tax rate, or in other words, the revenue tax rate that would yield no additional revenue over last year's on the same properties, is 13.9859 cents per $100 valuation. And I have a chart in a little while that will illustrate, if we were to look at property tax rate scenarios. So you have a chance to see how that would translate for us in terms of any kind of increase, which, by the way, we're not recommending, but it's just in case you were wondering how that does get us close to our 15 cents. So currently we have a tax rate of 14.1167 cents per $100 valuation. So that's the big change here from last time we presented. The big change from last time we presented to is that no new revenue tax rate, the way it's being calculated now, meant a decrease in the tax revenue from last time I presented. And we're talking here about maybe a difference. It was going to be like a difference of anywhere from $600,000 to $700,000. So what I did in my calculation, I used to have a reserve for refunds about $900,000. So in order to not have such a big impact on our revenue estimates, I actually lowered that to $500,000. And the reason why I did that, because, we're always very conservative, but the reason why I did that is because in that $46.1 billion of valuation, there are about over $900 and some million that is still under protest. And the $969 million that is under protest has been adjusted downward tremendously because the CAD now is instead of doing a discount rate of all those properties that are still under protest of like 1.2% in the past, now they're applying 2.8%. And this, if you recall from last year, I had mentioned that to you, is that really the taxing entities really have a hard time dealing with refunds. They don't want to be surprised. And so the CAD now is applying a higher discount rate on the entire valuation to come up with their adjustment to the property that is under protest. Now, there's a good chance when the October bills go out that those properties under protest are going to be higher in valuation from what they calculated. I know this is a lot to absorb, and I apologize. It is complicated, but I just want to give you a little bit of background of why the tax revenue did go down from the last time I calculated the property tax revenue. I asked Ms. Tellez to do a calculation of the effective tax rate, or the no new revenue tax rate, if we had used the same methodology as last year. And certainly if we had done that, then that tax rate would have been actually at about 14.07, I believe. So even closer to the tax rate we have. So certainly closer to the numbers that I had calculated back in June. So I just wanted to give you that background to kind of also give you a sense of some of really the challenges we had to deal with this year, even with our property tax revenue, notwithstanding the fact that we may have to even put a higher reserve because of tax collection may not pan out as like 99.9% of tax collection. Do you have any questions about this? I know it's mind-boggling and complicated, and I hope I did not lose you. So, interest income, as I mentioned earlier, our interest rates went down drastically because of obviously the downward trend by the Feds, lowering the rate in response to the economic crisis. So for next year, we're only budgeting $250,000 in interest income as compared to over $2.2 million. So that is a huge impact to our revenue projection. So I know you've seen those charts before. This is just to kind of give you a sense of what the shift in enrollment demographics is doing to our revenue. As you know, we do exempt our early college, high school, and dual credit students from tuition and fees. And so this is just to kind of show you a 7-year trend here of you can see the blue bar represents our total duplicated count of students. And then the yellow bar represents the early college, high school enrollment. And then the dark blue is your dual credit. And as you can see from 2013-14 all the way to 2019-20, you can see how our early college, high school enrollment has more than doubled. And then and very close also for our dual credit enrollment. So it does have, obviously, our exemptions are impacted because our tuition revenue is recorded on our books, but then the exemptions are really the form of payment. And so we really don't get that tuition revenue. But you also can see that our total enrollment has slightly declined, but yet the enrollment from those early college and dual credit students has gone up. So you can see how that shift is going to obviously impact our revenue. But as I mentioned earlier, we're also getting contact hours and student success points from those initiatives that are obviously very important for our community. But it's just an explanation here. I just wanted to explain to you why our numbers will shift from one year to the next, and we may not necessarily come in within our projected revenue for tuition, because it's sometimes not easy to predict really how much more enrollment we're going to have from those two student categories. Same thing with credit hours. In credit hours, that's what actually generates the tuition. And you can see the same pattern here. And then when you look at this next chart here, it illustrates really the trend for your paying student mix. So you can see as your net paying students, the blue line here, as you can see, has a downward trend. But yet you can also see conversely, we have the dual credit and early college lines that are going up. And this is here the paying student mix in credit hours. And you can see here the difference. We went from 88%, almost 89% for the paying student mix in credit hours to 77% during this fiscal year. Again, this is just for you are aware. So it makes sense to you when I come back with revenue projections and you see a decrease in tuition revenue as compared to what we budgeted. And then now you say, oh, okay, this is what this is coming from. And we'll explain that to you for sure, if that's what the case is. And of course, you combine that with the enrollment decrease. And so therefore you do have that. Then you have an explanation of why that tuition revenue needs to be adjusted from one year to the next. So,
Did you we adjust, do we set a credit hour rate, or does the state?
We set the credit. You approve the credit hour rate, Dr. Graham. When we come before you for a tuition increase, you set those rates.
So even those students that we get that are in the early college high school, those don't get affected though, right? Because we're not collecting any credit.
Right.
Hours.
Yeah, some years ago, we opted to not charge dual credit in early college high school students because really they are taught by the public schools instructors. And most of them are also not on premises. So all your dual credit students are, except for the early college high school that we do have some facilities, but your dual credit students are taught in the high schools by high school teachers. Now we do recoup the cost, or we do recoup $100 per student for those students that are taught by our instructor. And that is about $500,000 a year. So we do recoup some costs because if we do teach, we ask our faculty to teach those courses, then we do recoup that, and the public schools are being charged for that.
And earlier in the, a couple of months ago, we saw a slight decline in those. Did they come up the numbers for the dual credit?
They did, Dr. Ram, and quickly to clarify, you were correct. Early college high school, when early college high schools were created, they were created and institutions, it was statute that we not charge them any tuition and fees. And so early college high schools has remained in that aspect. Dual credit, on the other hand, is one where the institution chooses with regards to dual credit. We have seen this enrollment continue. It is somewhat leveled out, but you also see the state believes in dual credit. There's been much more of an increase. We're working with superintendents now who believe in dual credit, and we've seen that as well. Early college high schools will have 20 this fall. 72% of them receive their associate's degrees before they graduate from high school here in El Paso. The national average is 22%. So our students continue to do well, and it is, but we continue to see this enrollment rise. Ms. Shaughnessy is correct.
Thank you, Dr. Sadata. Any more questions before I move on to the no new revenue tax rate? Thank you. So I thought it was important for you to understand, or at least to be informed, because understanding, we struggle with understanding actually every line of that calculation. And Ms. Tellez is nodding and saying absolutely. So the county, by the way, the county does, they do confirm our calculation of the effective tax rate. And even this year, they were having a hard time with the calculation. So the no new revenue, or the NNR tax rate, that's something that was approved or that was replaced, that replaced the previously known effective tax rate. The legislators felt like a lot of people did not understand what the effective tax rate meant. So we had to explain. So now the no new revenue tax rate means exactly that. With that tax rate, you do not generate additional revenue because it is based on the same property as last year. And there's quite a few adjustments that are made to that effective tax rate that is now the NNR. It is calculated now to include Chapter 42 appeals that is related to disputed values of property under lawsuits. And so basically what they're saying is they are taking out any valuation that is related to disputed values of property under lawsuits. So it has the effect of decreasing that adjusted 2019 value by the disputed value. In other words, they're just pretending that those properties don't exist because they are under lawsuit. Now, once the lawsuit settles, then probably there will be some kind of value, obviously, and then that will be added back. Now, the net effect is now that the no new revenue tax rate is going to be lower than it would have been if the effective tax rate from prior years had been used. Which also means now that just like that's why the reason I had to adjust the tax revenue down, which was it did create quite a bit of grief for me because I thought maybe I had made a mistake somewhere. But the bottom line is because of this calculation now, we ended up with less tax revenue projection or projected for next year than if we had used the prior year effective tax rate calculation. So with that, I don't pretend to know much, a lot of detail on this, but I just will let you know that is a big change that we had to incorporate. And that is the reason if you compare the revenue that we are projecting for under the best case scenario to last time I presented, you're going to see it is lower. And you certainly have every right to ask, well, why is that? What happened here? So it is pretty significant. The voter approval tax rate is what replaces what we used to know as the rollback rate. So now you're going to see that advertised in a newspaper, on the website, all your taxing entities, they have to publish that voter approval tax rate, but that still represents 8% of the adjusted no new revenue tax rate. So it's not even 8% of the NNR that I just presented a while ago. It's actually 8% of an adjusted NNR. So it's an other calculation. Because if you were to take 8% of the no new revenue rate that I just presented a while ago, it does not equal the 15.1317 cents that you see before you. So just want to let you know that's also a little different. So the adjusted NNR rate considers refunds when arriving to the final voter approval tax rate. If you notice, your voter approval tax rate is above the authorized rate of 15 cents. So regardless of what we want to do here, we can go past 15 cents. In fact, you can see this, the impact here on this chart. And if you notice, I didn't even bother to put 8% as part of the tax rate increase that you see on this slide, because it really does not reflect the voter approval rate, since the voter approval rate is based on in a different NNR. So here what you can see is just your tax rate scenarios for fiscal year 21 projections. You can see your based on your no new revenue tax rate of 13.9859 cents, 59 cents per $100 valuation. We are going to generate about $64.5 million under just the best case scenario. So that's the number you're going to see in the revenue projections for next year. That's going to be the basis for any adjustment based on the various budget strategies that I will present in just a while. But you can see here, in order for us to even reach the 15 cents, we cannot increase that tax rate by more than 7.25%. And again, this is certainly not a recommendation, since we are going to be recommending to the board to adopt the NNR rate at the August 26th board meeting, unless I hear otherwise. Any questions on this chart? If you notice, if you were to, let's say, well, we want to stay at the same rate. We want to stay at 14.1167. That would represent a 0.93% increase over that NNR. And that is a tax increase, by the way. And now, by the way, the law has changed, and only one public hearing is required. There used to be 2 public hearings, and they've changed that under Senate Bill 2, and now it's only 1 public hearing that is required. Any questions from the board?
No.
Thank you. Okay, so revenue projections for next year. Best case scenario, and this is going to be really your base revenue that we're going to be using for budget strategies that we have updated for your viewing. So what are we looking at? What has changed here? Well, what has changed is we did the state appropriations remained the same as last time. We slightly increased the overhead recovery, and that's based on the fact that we we decreased the overhead recovery, although we do anticipate this will go up. And the reason why this will go up is because with the CARES Act grant, we do anticipate, we actually have two grants, yeah. With the CARES Act grant, we do anticipate we can recoup indirect costs, and therefore we could be looking at something a little bit higher than that $526,000. And we also have some new grants. We have, every year we do have some new grants. Some expire and some, and then some are added. So that one is always a moving target. Tuition and fees here are reflected as a little bit lower than last time. And the reason why is because we adjusted for the continuing education tuition. In light of those courses not being able to necessarily be taught because they really require a lot of face-to-face interaction, then we did decrease the revenue from the continuing education classes. So it's conservative. We hope it's conservative. And then if we do get, we're able to resume those classes, then it will be, like I said earlier, a windfall. Property taxes here has been also revised down from last time I presented. However, we're still looking at $2.5 million additional revenue. And that's because, again, it has a lot to do with those valuations that were actually held at a higher amount that was certified this past year. And it also includes about $1 million for new property, by the way. It does have new property in here. And another income has not changed much. It just was revised down slightly. But again, this is a big hit, as you can see on our budget. And so you see the total operating revenue at a best case scenario is $146,232,330. And the next item is the one that I was talking about earlier. So the self-supporting program have been adjusted down to reflect a more realistic picture. And so we've been carrying this amount of a budget now for several years, and we feel like it was time to probably revise that down to make it more realistic. That means that those budget heads that are in charge of those self-supporting programs had revised budgets for their own programs. And we also have an allocation in case that we have some new programs that come up during the year. So total revenue to support the budget for the preliminary budget for next year is $149,232,330. And this is, again, a best case scenario. Best case scenario. Any question on this slide? So for the sake of time, what I've done is I have removed quite a few of the charts dealing with expenditures, and they are all at the very end of the presentation. They are included in your packet. Certainly, if you want to go over those charts, I'll be glad to do so. I know that you probably want to see the budget strategies, so we are trying to, obviously, we're trying to minimize the amount of information that you are absorbing this evening. So here, this is just our regular chart that we show on our revenue sources, best case scenarios. As you can see, the property taxes takes the share of those revenue sources at 43.24%, followed by tuition and fees at 31.67%. And then in third place, as a major revenue source, state appropriation at 21.56%. And then you can see the other revenue sources that then complete that the 100% for those revenue sources, that amount of the $149.2 million. So what we also have revised is the expenditure budget. So a preliminary budget has slightly just slightly went down a bit from the last time we presented. But what is very different here is, again, the way we are budgeting for the self-supporting programs. As you can see, we met with, obviously, Dr. Farias. We went over all the programs in his area. We also met with VP Smith to discuss also the various programs in his area. And so those have been, we're still working actually on the programs for VP Smith. But as you can see, Dr. Farias's programs were revised down. But if you also notice, is our under financial and administrative operation, which which actually represents like a contingency budget, if you will, that is available in case new programs are created that generate additional revenue. And so we allocate the budget from that $891,000. If the revenue does not come in, the budget is not allocated. So again, it remains unspent because these are meant to be at a minimum self-supporting. So as you can see, the baseline budget now is the total baseline budget to be considered is $145,679,004. Any question on this particular slide? By now, I know you are all pros because you've seen those slides so many times, but certainly I am available to answer any question. This is really the same information sorted differently because when you all approve the budget at the end of August, you're actually going to approve a budget that is actually allocated by function. And actually the self-supporting program amount that you see will actually be allocated to the various, most likely under instruction and public service. So
at the end of August, the only difference we're looking at is what we need to cover for what everyone's asking for. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Mr. Haggerty. Would you please repeat that question?
Okay, you're saying our budget, you're looking at a budget of $145,679, correct?
This is the baseline budget, sir. Baseline.
Yeah. And at the end of August, we're going to come in here, we're going to add some other things in that everybody's asking for.
Well, we're going to be adding, not necessarily what everybody's asking for. We're going to be adding some needs, must be things that need to be funded.
Yeah. But I'm sure you're going to be adding a few other bucks in here.
Yes,
sir.
Correct? Yes, sir. And this is exactly what you're going to see in these next budget strategies. So if I can just show you what we're talking about here. So I know you've seen, it's a lot of numbers. I realize that. So this again, these strategies have been updated. They've been updated, and I have highlighted those elements that were updated. So I mentioned to you earlier, tuition and fees. So when we look at revenue to fund, at least to fund the baseline budget of $145,679,004. Under the best case scenario, okay, we are looking at actually having a surplus of $3.5 million. And what I mean by a surplus, that is available to fund additional needs. So each one of those strategies from best case scenario 1 all the way to worst case scenario 6 is really based on the different elements of revenue. So tuition and fees, as I mentioned earlier, that is being adjusted. So best case scenario, this is what I just showed you a while ago. And then everything else from scenario 2 to scenario 6 shows the adjustment in tuition and fees if you have a 10% enrollment drop, 15% enrollment, 5 and 30. So it's very similar to what I presented last time, except those numbers have changed because if you recall, I mentioned to you that we adjusted those numbers to reflect a downward trend in continuing education courses. Property taxes has been also adjusted down to what I presented last time to reflect under the best case scenario This is the $64.5 million is based on the NNR rate, the no new revenue tax rate. And then it's being adjusted for each strategy based on the assumption. So on scenario 2, we are looking at 95% tax collection. So that $91.2 million of property taxes that you can see in the second column reflects that we have adjusted the number of 64,521,000 by 5%. Actually, it's by 4% because we always look at tax collection as being about 99% tax collection. So as you can see, for each one of those scenarios, those numbers are adjusted down to reflect those assumptions of tax collection. Yes.
Hi, this is Christina. Where are we, I guess, at this point, and if it can even be, I guess, deciphered in terms of enrollment? Like, how are we doing now versus last year, for example? I guess to kind of maybe gauge where we are. Absolutely,
Ms. Sanchez. Very good question, because what we are looking at probably is scenario number 4. We are looking at a 20% enrollment drop. Right now, the numbers that we have as of today, and Mr. Flores gave me those numbers, we are looking about 19% enrollment decrease, and that's for enrollment headcount, but we are about 18% in credit hours. 18% down in credit hours. And the credit hours is what generates, obviously, the tuition and the general use fees. So right now, we're probably looking at scenario number 4 to be probably the most realistic. We are going to be monitoring this between now and August the 24th. And I will talk about that a little bit later again, but just to let you know that we plan, next time we meet, you're not going to be seeing all these strategies, okay? I think you've seen them enough, and we want to be able to give you we want to present to you a proposed budget for your approval, by the end of the month. So we are looking, what's going to happen here, Ms. Sanchez, is between now and let's say the 24th of August, we're going to be looking at how we're doing with enrollment, but it's probably looking to be conservative. If, let's say, we are at 18% now, it probably right now we would choose that scenario number 4. We feel like probably that's the most realistic and maybe the most conservative. It may not be the most conservative, but certainly the most realistic. If we wanted to be conservative, we could go to 30%, but that certainly is very taxing for the district. So we're looking at scenario number 4. So if you look at each one of those scenarios, you can see that if you compare the total projected revenue under each one of those scenarios, and you compare that to the baseline budget that is also highlighted because it changed, look at your budget surplus before we look at any kind of additional needs. And we do have some. And it's not the wish list, it's actually what needs to be funded. We pretty much told everybody, sorry, no wish list, okay? So we are looking at really the nitty-gritty that we need. So budget surplus for each one of those scenarios is 3.5 under the best case scenario, but you can see from scenarios 2 to 6, it's a deficit for each one of those, anywhere from 4.5 million all the way to 13 million on the worst case scenario. And so going to the next slide, which addresses Mr. Haggerty's question, is, as you can see, we start at the very top, what is it that we, before any additional needs, what we have to contend with. And then we look at additional funding needs. So transfer to the TPEG. We had an increase in tuition, so we have to add additional funds in that restricted fund for students. And all this goes to students. This is need-based aid. The transfer, we have some fluctuation here because of the way the budget is currently at. And I'm not going to spend time explaining that to you, but all I want to say here is that your enrollment, any decrease in enrollment affects the transfers to those various funds. So we have an enrollment decrease, we have to adjust those transfers down, which means what? We reduce our budget. If enrollment increased, then it would go the other way, and it would be an additional expense to the district. So this is what these numbers are about here. The transfer to the athletic fund is based on the $2, the additional $2.50 that was approved by the board to allocate more money from tuition to those programs. And that was part of the tuition increase that you approved back in February. Overhead here is the same as last time, but I just wanted to mention that with the unemployment claims that we have been receiving, so we don't carry an unemployment insurance, but we are self-funded, so we basically have to pay for claims when we are charged by TWC. And so the budget for that has been, we have very, very, very low turnover at the college, and the budget has been $60,000 now for several years. At one point, it was 115. Then our workforce really was very stable. And so we actually reduced that budget down to 60,000. Last quarter, or the second quarter of the year, we received a bill from TWC and it was $200,000. So not necessarily a big surprise, but obviously this is something we have to deal with. So normally what we could say, okay, $200,000 per quarter, 4 quarters in a year, the expense we should be planning for is $800,000. I certainly did not feel comfortable doing that. And what we are proposing to do actually is if truly we are looking at those kind of claims, that means that the employees are not working those hours anymore with EPCC, which means that we have savings in our part-time salaries. And so we would have to fund those claims from those savings. Does this make sense to you?
Yes, I have a question, Shaughnessy.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Carmen. Everything points to the budget getting depleted when the enrollment goes down, right? So
Yes.
doesn't it make sense that we should be looking at investing some money to target improving enrollment at a more aggressive manner than what we have been doing? I know we've seen a little bit of an improvement, but it appears that we need to be more aggressive.
And Dr. Graham, and that's certainly something maybe Dr. Sedata wants to respond to, or Ms. Mo, but I know that we have invested in significant advertising targeted to our audiences, and to truly reach out, to reach those students that need to understand we have the Karzak funding. We certainly are the best value in the Southwest. We want to encourage them, obviously, to continue their education. And certainly we have invested in that. And certainly we have not, any time that Ms. Mo has needed to do additional blitzes or additional billboards or anything that truly is enhancing that could certainly reach out our students, we have provided the funding for that. Of course, our calling campaigns is another big plus. So we know that the summer enrollment really panned out higher than beyond our wild dreams, actually, because we ended up with probably an 8% increase for the summer, which was the largest ever, for what I understand. And certainly those were the efforts of the calling campaign. So we are enlisting the help of our employees that may not be able to work remotely from home on their regular duties, but now are able to help with the calling campaign. So we are really capitalizing on that. And certainly I would welcome Dr. Sedata to add to that, because I'm pretty sure I have forgotten something.
No worries. Thank you, Ms. Shaughnessy. Dr. Graham, it's a great point. And I'll share a couple of things with regards to enrollment. Ms. Sanchez had a comment on it earlier as well. Right now, we've improved, but what we're seeing is we're still seeing a challenge with regards to enrollment. Not unique to us. I was on a call at noon today with the other 49 presidents and chancellors from throughout the state. And we're seeing enrollment declines anywhere from 6 to, I think the highest I heard today was 27% across the state. We all saw, or the majority of us saw, an increase in summer enrollment, but it wasn't easy. it took a lot of effort for us to develop the calling campaign and move forward. And we're seeing the calling campaign, we didn't stop. We shifted from summer to fall, beginning in July. We kept going in summer for July because we still had summer 2 that was still moving forward. And at one point, summer was down 36%. We ended up 8% on head count, actually 12% on credit hours and contact hours. Fall was down, when I started monitoring fall in April, it was down 76%. We're currently down 19% today, 17% on contact hours. For context, admissions and registrars saw over 650 students yesterday. Financial aid saw over 1,000 students yesterday in the virtual offices that have been established. So what we're seeing is we're making up ground. We just have a longer way to go. And what we have done is we actually considered delaying the start of the fall semester and bringing that to you as an action item, delaying it by 1 week. And we balance that with federal financial aid will be processed this Friday. And our students desperately need those resources, probably this semester more than any other semester, given everything that they're dealing with the pandemic, loss of jobs. 70% of our students work, not because they want to work, they work because they have to. So we didn't feel it was in the best interest for students with regards to their aid and needing that. What we are doing, I give a lot of credit to Vice President Smith, to our deans, our faculty, Mr. Hernandez, who's our faculty senate president. We are going to allow enrollment through the first week of class for students to continue to add courses, for us to continue the process, but not delay their federal financial aid. So we're moving forward with that. In regards to what you requested, we have increased our marketing. I know that you've seen some of that. A lot of it is social media. You may not see it unless I know, Dr. Graham, you're very active on social media, but you'll see the ads that we're putting out. We've spent an additional $40,000 on ads in this last period of time. We're doing direct mail to 70,000 individuals where postcards are going out. What are you waiting for? Postcards, calls to actions. We're doing geofencing, targeted geofencing as well. Ms. Mo and her team continue to move forward with this. Dr. Gonzalez and the calling campaign are moving forward with this. And it's not unique to them. We've turned over resources. So for instance, 2 members of our office are dedicated to the calling campaign. It's not just student services. We've turned over staff from our office, from other areas of the institution to move forward on this. What we've seen is, so we were able to make up that ground for summer. Summer enrollment is 12,500 students. Fall enrollment is over 29 students. So what it is it's taking us longer to catch up. I do agree with, I'm very conservative when it comes to the budget. I think it's in our best interest that scenario 4 that we look at, we plan for a 20% enrollment decline. I don't believe that we'll see a 20%, but it's in the best interest to be very conservative in that planning with 95% tax collection. So scenario 4, as Ms. Shaughnessy indicates, the real issue that we're seeing with students is they're having to reapply for federal financial aid. So if you think of the spring students going into the summer, they had the opportunity to apply for summer financial aid, but this is a much larger student group that we're seeing. The 2 areas that we're seeing down the most in enrollment are dual credit, and that is very much has to do with the changing schedule of the school district. So initially they were all going to start on August 3rd, save Socorro that was going to start July 27th. Then TEA got involved and changed the rules, and the health department put forth an order that they not meet in person until after Labor Day. Then the Attorney General weighed in, then the governor, the speaker, and the lieutenant governor all weighed in, and so now they're all starting on Monday, on August the 17th. So we believe dual credit will be there for processing. We're currently down, and they have closed the gap dramatically on dual credit. We were down 50% as of this morning on dual credit processing. We are now down, where is I should tell you right now because I have it in front of me, we're now down 29%. So they have improved it dramatically, and I believe dual credit will be there when it's all said and done. The first time in college student is still down 32%. Both of these were down 50% last week. So we're seeing the processing catch up. I believe that the additional week that our faculty has been tremendous in the flexibility, the additional week of allowing students, in particular since virtually, well, no pun intended, but the majority of our classes are being offered in a virtual environment, that they'll be able to work with students on that. We think that we'll be able to mitigate and close this gap. I don't think that we'll end up. I think that we'll end up probably very close to flat. For the regular semester, the mini-mester, we're continuing to add courses so we can continue to process students and enroll them. But we're seeing this across the state. Again, no offense to the other 49, I only care about El Paso with regards to what we're trying to accomplish. So we are moving forward with the additional marketing efforts and direct mailing efforts. We'll continue to do that. We're also looking at, we sent out, the Trellis Foundation sent a FAFSA card. We're following up for the federal financial aid. We targeted an additional 12,000 to a reminder for them to enroll. So all that to say that we believe that we can mitigate much of it. I don't believe that we'll be able to mitigate all of it. I do think, unfortunately, we're going to see a segment of students choosing not to enroll this fall based on the fears of the pandemic. Students that will just end up thinking that they can't afford it. We're going to continue to work with them, Dr. Graham, but enrollment is incredibly important, not just for the sake of enrollment. As we come out of this economic recession, the last recession we saw that started in 2008 nationally, 2011 in Texas, the new jobs that were created, over 99% went to individuals with degrees and certificates. So we know this is going to be even more important, but we'll continue to push in all directions to mitigate the enrollment loss, and we'll continue to update the board.
I think that some of the things that we're doing are great. There's just a few things that I think we can revisit, and maybe the board and some of your cabinet should have a session to just discuss what else can we do. One example that I'll give you is that I was dealing with today is an easier to navigate website for schedules. I'm sorry, but I looked at some of the other colleges and I looked at ours, and I'm not sure why the scheduling isn't, or the website isn't more under maybe marketing, because that's where all these young people, that's where they go. They go to the website. Starting other mini-masters like you have, so that if somebody wasn't ready right when we started, then there's another opportunity. Call center, a call center that can be set up so that people can talk to a human. That is the biggest complaint I hear, that they call different numbers and nobody answers. They leave messages, they send, and nobody calls back. Those are things that are hurting us when you compare to what's going on in the other schools that are offering classes that are not as maybe as well delivered as ours, or as cost-effective as ours. But, bringing back former students that took some classes, but then they left for some reason, trying to target those to bring it back. Improving our senior citizen program. We should be offering a lot more. It just seems like it's stagnant. It's been the same thing since I got on the board. I don't see anything more exciting. And yes, you can have a presentation and they tell you we're doing this and we're doing that, but then when you visit the centers, they haven't heard of it, of BPCC. That doesn't work well. And I'm not the only one that goes through that. Belen went through that herself, visiting the centers, and they don't have more context from EPCC. Offering, possibly spending some money offering technology as an incentive. Look at all these other schools are offering a laptop. And the kids will gravitate towards that because they're going to get a laptop.
And I see that with my own son. You know, we're paying $45,000 on tuition, but he was bragging because the college gave him a laptop. And I said, they gave you a laptop? And, you know, it just doesn't make sense, but that's what they're looking at, those incentives. More staff that can go out to the community and recruit with companies. Asking the companies, you know, what can we do to get your students? I'll give you a perfect example. The school districts have a lot of teacher aides that right now could be enrolled in the teacher education program if we had people out there recruiting them. I just recruited 2 this week there because, and I said, why aren't you thinking about getting, you know, your associates? Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't even know where to start. And I gave her one of those cards that Carrie Moe made for me that has the information. And then I gave her a catalog that I picked up here at the last board meeting. And she looked at it and she said, oh my God, I didn't know they were sharing all these or offering all these classes. Now she's all excited because she's enrolling and she's gonna get it. So it's the recruitment, the one-on-one, trying to see what we can do to improve the child care. And I know the judge says we're not in the child care business, but if you offer that to people that are home with little ones, they will come to classes. Increase.
I didn't say we were in the child care business.
Yeah, you should be many years
Child care
ago.
business for the employees. I have no problem with child care for students.
Well,
I have no problem. I understand what you're saying. If a student can put his kid in child care, he can go to class.
Okay.
What I'm upset about is we have child care and there's no room for the student's kid because somebody that's working here has it.
we should have it for both sections.
That's where I have a problem.
The other one is, increasing the international students. We used to have a lot more. And I know that I was the first one to push back on that some years ago, that the college was built for our kids here. International students as well. We need to see if we can get some of those grants that we used to have that would bring the international students, because that's money that was coming in to the college. The work study program, do we have any money that we can increase the numbers? Perhaps that could be an attractive incentive for some of the students that want to study, but they also need an income. Maybe the foundation can sponsor some of those students. Incentivize our employees to come up with ideas to enroll more students. Somehow, if we can incentivize them, they'll start thinking of what can we do. But I think the biggest problem is the customer service. It's got to change. And I'm done.
I'm sorry not to belabor the point, but I think, Dr. Graham, I think you bring up some good points. And this is Christina, and I think the points that you bring up, I think, are critical in terms of where we are right now with this new normal that we're facing, right? And so if there is a way or plan or idea in terms of how we can improve that, or really maybe think outside the box, and I think we have. I think that the college has done a good job in terms of really doing that personal one-on-one contact. But I think expanding that and maybe just having a different frame of mind and thought in terms of, okay, we now know that this new normal means that we may be working from home, studying from home, schooling from home for at least the foreseeable future, at least through the fall. And so what can we do to perhaps figure out what the college's niche could be? And I think, absolutely a good one would be the customer service, ensuring that there is that callback if there is none. But maybe some other sort of plan, and maybe the focus is that messaging maybe to the departments and to the other employees as to, okay, look, we got to really shift our mind and shift our focus of where we are. This is in reality where we are with our funding. This is in reality of where we are with our budget, and cause and effect sort of a deal. Like, unless we can really effectuate and ensure that we have more students, I mean, we're seeing some hard cuts, and we will see some hard cuts. So let's do the best that we can to reach out to each and provide that personal service to each of those students that call in. You know, I don't know. It's tough. I think a lot of folks are in that same boat, but I think that at least we have that opportunity to capitalize on that and really just kind of shift that mindset and that focus. I think those issues that you bring up, Dr. Graham, are very well taken and perhaps, you know, really need to be messaged and communicated to the rest of the college so that we can see some difference. You know, it matters at the end of the day. It matters with the budget. It matters all the way to the top. This is what we're looking at. So just a comment there. Thank you, Dr. Graham, for those comments.
Yes, ma'am. Nina, you had some comments the other day. You want to share them? Ms. Pina?
Sorry, I was trying to get the microphone and I couldn't. Is that what we're talking about yesterday, Dr. Graham?
Yes.
Well, yes, and I already mentioned it to Dr. Serrata, and I agree with what Christina was saying, you know, and right now we're at the point that we want to make sure that the students are getting.
Oops.
Did we lose her?
Are you there, Nina?
I think we lost her. I show that she's still on.
I'm thinking of going a different route, you know, because as it is, it's a very hard program and everything. So, you know, and also another issue is I got an email from this gentleman that he is in the military and he was trying to graduate in December with criminal justice. And he mentioned, I don't know who else got that email. Did any
I
other board
actually
members?
think he said
Pardon me?
the one that changed.
Yeah.
Dr. Zapata's gonna speak to that.
Yes, Ms. Pina, actually that gentleman, this was a student who was a veteran who was trying to graduate, came in on a catalog where we had a certain set of requirements, and then his degree plan was run up against another catalog. So several board members reached out to me. Actually, by the time I reached out to our staff, it had already been resolved. And
good.
so, yeah, so he's graduating in December.
Because you could hear that he was kind of disappointed.
Correct. This is one where he went to the board before coming to me, and everyone has that opportunity to do that, but our team had already resolved that by the time that I actually reached out to the different areas in that area, in his case. This is one where I certainly concur. Go ahead, please.
No, what I was gonna say that's good to hear, because you know that you could hear that he was very disappointed, especially at his age. He said, you know, that but I'm glad that it was solved and everything. But let's think about all the other ones and all the, you know, the way the students feel, and it's just encouraging for them to want to enroll for the online classes, knowing that they're not going to get the services as it is, you know, tutoring and things like that. And the fact that the professors don't reach out to them, it would affect the enrollment and all that.
But I would also like to make mention that every time that we get complaints and we send them forward to you. Thank you, because you always take care of them. And I know that immediately within the same day, the individual is contacted or, you know, right away. So that helps a lot. But we shouldn't have to be bringing them to you.
No, I certainly appreciate the opportunity. I mean, this is, you all know, prior to this role, I was in student affairs. And so students are incredibly important to the institution, in particular now as we're dealing with challenges that we've never dealt with before, transitioning to a complete online environment. It's something that we continue to work on. We will make sure that we get better. I know that the vice presidents and cabinet members are on the line as well. It's something that we look at regularly, and I appreciate the board bringing it to my attention. If we don't know about it, then there's no way for us to follow up on it. So certainly appreciate every board member that has any concern.
Thank you, Dr. Serrata, and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pina. Ms. Shaughnessy, I know that you are on, you were going through this particular slide that we see on the screen.
Thank you, Dr. Serrata. And this slide sort of addresses what Mr. Haggerty was talking about earlier. You know, what about those, everything else that people are asking for, and how we're dealing with that. So on this slide, we do show additional funding needs. So and those are really the must be funded. Aside from all the different transfers that we have to do, which is really very much dependent on enrollment, the last two items, which is the overhead and the new facilities, that is really to address, obviously, budgetary items that need to be funded. So the overhead includes an increase in our insurance for property, because we're going to have additional facilities. It also addresses additional utilities for the new facilities. And then under the new facilities, we have also any kind of additional staff that is related to the opening of the Rio Grande campus, and any other needs that were prorated last year, because last year when you all approved the budget, we prorated some of those expenses for, let's say, half of a year for those facilities that were opening up last year, this year versus what's going to happen next year. So again, we have vetted those needs, and those are before, your consideration. So the total additionals under the best case scenario is to add $2.4 million to the budget. So obviously that has the impact of either reducing the surplus or reducing the deficit. So when we looked at the next slide, we're saying, okay, we are looking at a budget surplus under the best case scenario of a little bit over $1 million. And so really, we certainly can put that amount if that were the case. If we were that lucky to be under flat enrollment, best case scenarios of 99% tax collection, then we would be able to add to the budget, to the biennium reserve without touching anything else, that $1 million. However, scenarios 2 through 6, as you can see, after considering those additional needs, we have a deficit that we need to fund. And so how would we fund that deficit? So we have been considering all of these, and obviously this would be very difficult, because here you're looking at a budget that's going to have to be reduced by a significant amount of money in order to balance the budget. So here, this is just to show you on the scenario, let's say on the scenario 4, if this was the scenario that we are going to propose, then we're looking at, we need to fund $8.9 million because we're in a deficit of $8.9 million. And how do we do that? So we have a variety of options with $8.9 million. We can do a combination of all of these. We can use the biennium reserve. We would reduce the travel budget, because we have a travel budget of $1.2 million right now. We know we're not going to be able to travel for a while. And so we definitely could reduce our budget travel budget by $800,000. We can also continue freezing the position and use that funding towards that deficit. So we're talking about $2 million a year for those positions that were under recruitment prior to COVID-19. So those were already underway, meaning what? They were deemed needed to obviously help with our current workforce. And then we
Ms. Shaughnessy, can I stop you right there?
Yes, sure.
So you mentioned on the biennium reserve, how much does that chip away at our overall reserve funds there?
Oh.
And I'm looking at this. I'm looking at scenario 4. Or is that just how much we have in total? Is that what you're saying?
That's what we have in total, right? In the budget, we currently have $1.9 million.
Okay, and then I guess at some point, as we go along the budget process, are you going to show us a budget scenario where reserves would be tapped into? I guess as part of your recommendation.
Are you talking about our fund balance reserve? If you talk,
yes.
Okay, absolutely not. We are not recommending to tap into any fund balance reserve. That would not bode very well for our rating agencies, SACS accreditation, in general. It's just not a very good, because you see, when you start tapping into the reserve to fund a budget that's going to have to be funded again next year, you are really using one-time fund for repetitive funding. So it's really it's never a good practice to do that. At least we do not advocate for it, and we have not been doing that really for years, because you have to replace that, and that's going to be tough, especially in light of potential state reduction next year. So we are not recommending. That's the reason why we put a biennium reserve in there. We try to set aside enough money in there to help us weather out this kind of crisis. So last year, when you approved this year's budget, we actually had a biennium reserve that was higher than this, and we used it. We used it to fund our salary, the salary enhancement recommendation. And so that did chip away at that. It did. Okay. Traditionally, Ms. Sanchez, the way that we replenish that biennium reserve is when we have a tuition increase that is not going to be implemented until the following year, and then we're able to gather enough revenue, and then put it into a biennium reserve. And then the following year that we may not have a tax increase or any tuition increase, then that's when we use it against to fund any salary enhancement. But if you notice here, we're not making any recommendation for salary enhancement, unfortunately, because we just do not have it. So absolutely, the biennial reserve is a budgeted item. It is not a fund balance reserve. But it's a very good question, Ms. Sanchez. Good clarification. So
thank you.
Sure, you're very welcome. So here what you see is the various budget reduction that we can implement to cover that 8.9 million. If you look at under scenario 4, for example, if you look at all those potential budget reduction, they total about $15 million. You see that? $15 million. But we only need to fund 8.9 under this scenario, which means that we have some room. We have some room to maybe keep the biennial reserve, release some of those vacant positions for recruitment, because we know we're going to need some of these positions. Okay, we know that we cannot do our operation efficiently and effectively if we are not able to refill some of these critical positions. The cost reduction in part-time instructional salary. Well, two things I wanted to cover here. So I did propose a reduction in travel budget being upped from the original amount that I had put as $600,000 in the last presentation to $800,000 to give us a little bit more room. And then on the frozen vacant position, right now we have the frozen vacant position that are not under recruitment prior to COVID-19 at $5.7 million. We know that 1.5 of that is for new facilities. So we want to be very careful with that. We don't want to be opening new facilities and we don't have, especially if you have frozen position, we want to make sure that we do have the staff to obviously be in those new facilities. So as you can see, that 4.2 million across all strategies reflects a 1.5 million reserve to actually recruit for those positions if needed during the year. So just to be conservative and not really tie ourselves, so much that we are not able to, to continue operations. We have to be very careful with that. The other thing that I wanted to discuss is the cost reduction in part-time instructional salary. If you were to look at the last presentation, those amounts were higher. So what we decided to do to be on the safe side is to actually factor a 20% margin error. And not necessarily to say it's an error, but it's more a statistical kind of measure here, because these savings were generated more like in a linear type of method. And it's based on this year's enrollment, but not necessarily knowing the mix of hybrid, or not, that's not what I meant. Not necessarily knowing the mix of, let's say, class size for those online classes that we are teaching. It's kind of hard to say that we're actually going to have those kind of savings until we actually able to what actually happens. So here what you're seeing is actually more conservative numbers as savings. So we are not caught short if for some reason we missed something in a calculation or we did not address what the reality is in terms of class size. So really, if you look at scenario 4, if you were to compare the budget deficit of $8.9 million versus the potential budget reduction that we have available, which really would it would be difficult for us to do that. It's $50 million. That means that you have a $6.7 million to work with. In other words, you can do a combination of all of these. We can keep a biennium reserve. We can keep the institutional clearing as a contingency fund. You can also look at all the position, and that's something we have requested also from our vice president. Look, you look at your list and you try to determine now what really needs to be funded. And so in that case, then we would be able to leave those positions intact to be recruited and then reserve the other to fund the deficit. Does this make sense to you?
It does make sense, but I do have a concern with the reduction of the part-time instructional staff, only because do they not teach mostly outside of the 8 to 5 hours, and they're in the evenings or in the early mornings or the weekends? Because so many of our
And Dr. Graham, I certainly understand your concern. This is really based on the fact that if we have any enrollment decrease under these strategies, the number of sections that would be reduced because we don't have the enrollment to support it. So if we don't teach those sections, then that adjunct faculty is not going to be asked to teach that semester. It's not so much that we are cutting the budget. We're just saying we're going to have savings in there because we are not going to have those sections. So it's more a cost avoidance than it is really a cost reduction. It's not like saying, okay, faculty, we're not going to need you this semester. It's more like in response to the fact we have sections because our adjunct faculty are asked to teach a class when the class makes. If the class does not make, then they don't teach that class, and we also don't forget, we also have to give the workload to our tenured faculty. So we have to make sure that they're also teaching the sections that they are paid to teach. So obviously that load is going to shift to our tenured faculty. And then unfortunately, yes, we will not be able to hire as many adjunct faculty during the semester. And again, these strategies really take into consideration 20%, for this one is 20% enrollment drop, but we also have factored a 7% drop in spring. We're hoping 7% is conservative, and we're hoping that things will kind of look up for us in the spring. But again, this is based on that kind of enrollment drop strategy. So here is just to show you that you have some room with, to cover those deficits, depending on the scenario, with those potential budget reduction. All of them put together, yes, it would be difficult. It will be difficult, but at least here it shows you that you have a little bit of room. The next slide is to show you if I show no cost reduction in part-time instructional salary, Dr. Graham. If I show absolutely nothing in there, okay, no savings. So you can see on the scenario 4, we actually would have $9.4 million, but that means that we have to really freeze everything here to cover the majority. We have a little bit of extra money, $531,000, that we would be able to be able to kind of give us a little bit more capacity. But if you look at scenario 5 and scenario 6, without considering any cost reduction in part-time instructional salary, in other words, leaving the budgets the way they are, then you are looking at having to fund significantly from that part-time instructional salary. One of the things that we don't do is, regardless how the enrollment is, if the enrollment goes down, we never go to VP Smith and say, you know what, we're going to decrease your part-time instructional salary budget. And the reason why is we need to have some capacity in case enrollment goes up. And we don't want to have to go back to the board and say, we need an additional $2 million or $5 million. So we try to be very, in a way, a little bit more liberal, because we know if enrollment goes up, we don't want to have to go back to the board and say, you know what, we have additional revenue, but we need additional money now because we don't have it in the budget. So we would be very, very conscious of that, Dr. Graham. And we would be very careful about going about reducing that part-time instructional salary pool. But this is just to give you some sense. So if we are to propose scenario 4, then we certainly could not touch those part-time instructional salary, because at this point we don't really need it. But that means we're also going to have budget savings during that year. During this next year, if we are adopting that proposed budget scenario that we would be presenting to you in August. So this is just to show you some options. And when we come before you in August, we obviously going to have we're going to propose, this is what we are suggesting we do, because this is what makes sense for us for this coming year.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Absolutely. So aside from the operating budget, we also have an impact of the enrollment drop on the other funds. And I wanted to just go over that because I think it's important for you to be informed. The TPEC fund. So true, if we have an enrollment drop, the TPEC fund, the transfer to the TPEC fund is going to create some savings in the operating budget, but it also means they're going to have less revenue in the TPEC fund to provide financial aid to students. So that transfer, as a reminder, that transfer from the unrestricted fund, or i.e. the operating budget, is based on 6% of tuition. So 6% of tuition, and also, so that calculation is made on a regular basis. The Student Activities Fund. So if there is an enrollment drop, the Student Activities Fund benefits from any enrollment, which is based on $5 per student and $1 per credit hour. So when we decrease when enrollment drops, then that means that there is less transfer from the unrestricted fund, i.e. the operating budget that goes to the Student Activities Fund. So they're having now to obviously look at their budget, and the Student Activities Fund is administered by the Student Government Association under the leadership of Ms. Jones. And so we already met with them, and they already know they have to cut their budget. They have to be ready for potential enrollment drop. So they're having to react to that. The Intercollegiate Athletic Fund. Now, the good news for the Athletic Fund this year is because the board approved, along with the Tuition and Fees Committee, by the way, approved a $2.50 allocation to the Athletic Fund. So that certainly that's going to be boosting that fund and helping cover their expenses. However, we know that sports have been on hold for the fall. And so therefore they're going to have less expenses. They're still going to get the transfer from the unrestricted fund, but it probably will be less because of the enrollment drop. And then last but certainly not least, well, actually, there's one more fund, auxiliary fund. So the auxiliary fund, in August, we're going to be coming before you to talk to having you adopt the auxiliary fund budget, because it's part of our operating budget or educational and general fund. And so how is the auxiliary fund impacted? Well, the bookstore commissions, if there's less enrollment, there are obviously less books are being sold to the student. Your beverage, your food services commission, the auxiliary fund is funded, the budget is funded by that kind of revenue. Vehicle registration fee. Chief Ramirez, as I mentioned earlier, is counting on that fee to fund some fixed cost that he has, because we're still monitoring our parking lots. We're still monitoring the cars that are parked there. And even though there may be less cars on campus, we are also decentralized. So it's not like you can have one police officer that can now handle less cars on campus, but we have six facilities, 6 separate facilities. And so he's still going to have those costs. The other fund that is impacted, and this is not advancing. I'm sorry, not advancing. There we go. Thank you very much. Debt retirement fund. And how is the debt retirement fund impacted? Well, the general use fee that we assess from our students, the $20 per credit hour, is the purpose of that general use fee is to retire the annual debt service, which is now about $9.1 million annually. And this is the debt service on our 2016 and 17 revenue bonds. This general use fee generates $10.5 million annually. Now we have a debt service of 9.1, so the 10.5 is more than sufficient to cover the 9.1. But if you have an enrollment decrease, we're looking at about $1.7 million less for a 30% enrollment decrease. It's a $1.3 million with a 20% enrollment decrease, which would be a break even actually. So, but we have to understand that general use fee is we have to levy that general use fee, and any impact, any enrollment drop will create a potential pressure on this fund. Now, if we have any deficit that is because of that enrollment drop, it can be funded from what we call the revenue fund. It is within that debt retirement fund. And that revenue fund is actually a fund balance that is created by the accumulation of surpluses of allocated pledge revenues over the annual debt service. And so it accumulates every year. And it's very important to keep that, because at really no time should we touch the debt reserve fund. And we're saying, okay, what is that fund now? So we have a bond covenant for each one of those bond issues that requires the establishment of a debt reserve fund that is equivalent to the maximum annual debt service of $9.153 million. And that should be used as a last resort. So we want, as much as possible, make sure that we have enough revenue in the debt retirement fund to at least cover the annual debt service. So just to make you aware, I can tell you it is a question every year on our bond disclosure report that we do every February. And they always ask, it's on the form, have you had to use your debt reserve fund? And so I always check no. And I'm always very proud to check no, because once you touch that, then it looks like we're not able to meet our obligation. And so it should always be something that is used as a last resort. So again, it's very important that we continue having that general use fee flow into that fund, create some surpluses that can really be like a little contingency fund when we do have the kind of situation that we're experiencing now. And certainly I'm sure that I'm speaking for my colleagues. I cannot remember a time that we ever had to worry about a 20% or 30% decrease in enrollment, because obviously it impacts this fund. The other thing that I want to also say is that the bond covenant also allows the college to pledge 25% of tuition. But we don't want to really pledge 25% of tuition because the 25% of tuition is there to fund our operating budget. So you can imagine if we were to move 25% of tuition into this fund, that would certainly create a lot of pressure. But that's not something we've had to do, and it's not something that we are doing now. The only tuition transfer that we do is a $900,000 a year, which is based on really actually an old bond covenant of $15 per student in fall and spring and $7.50 per student in the summer. We're continuing that. It's part of the 25%, but we really don't need 25% of tuition to go into that fund. So I will pause here because I know this is complicated. Yes, ma'am.
So it really doesn't mean anything as far as the students transferring. That the word transfer there, I thought it was something that we were assessing the students that transfer.
I wish. No.
No. Okay.
No. We call it a transfer because we allocate. We don't charge a fee. The tuition and the general use fee is the only mandatory fee that we have. Every other fee is already included in tuition, and we adopted that a long time ago so that there was not, the students didn't have to contend with all those fees, like technology fees. So what we do is we do an allocation of that tuition to fund different things. So for example, the transfer to the technology fund, we have about $1.5 million that goes into that fund every year. Okay. We have obviously the transfer to the athletics. We don't assess an athletic fee to the student. The student, they don't see that. It's already included in their tuition. So the transfer is really mean a allocation from the operating budget into those various funds to help them fund the different activities in those funds. Does this make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Any other question on this slide? So what you're going to see in August is a proposed budget for the auxiliary fund. And so in August, we always ask you to adopt the operating budget, of course, and we also ask you to adopt the auxiliary fund. And, I wanted to make sure here you understood the potential impact of this enrollment decrease what we talked about. So, for example, for all the revenues that go into the auxiliary fund, they include vehicle registration, all your commissions from bookstore, our beverage contract, our food court contracts, our snack, those vending machines that we have, the ATM commissions, because we have ATM machines that are at various campuses, the rental from the GCU bank that is at the Valle Verde campus and under the contract, they do provide some income that we record in the auxiliary fund. And we also have a return check processing fee that we assess our students whenever there's a return check. This has gone down dramatically because a lot of students now don't use checks, but once in a while we do get that. And this is, by the way, we don't charge them anything more than what the bank actually assesses when we have a return check. But here the big impact, as you can see, is vehicle registration. So vehicle registration for this year, because the year is pretty much completed, students usually get, and students and employees usually get their decals at the beginning of the fall semester or in the spring semester for the students. But we're looking at $845,000 for this year. But if you look at what we're projecting for next year, this is really based on a staggered return of our staff and students back on campus. And this is probably very conservative. We are hoping to get a whole lot more. This is the amount that we were talking about earlier that maybe the Karzak can assist, not necessarily to the tune of, $745,000, but certainly at some degree probably could assist us if we choose to do that. Bookstore commissions, we're looking here at a reduced amount because, again, of what is going on with the enrollment. And this is, again, very conservative. Mr. Juan Flores, who is our Director of Auxiliary Services, came up with those numbers. And he said, those are very conservative. So we're certainly hoping that it will be much better than that. Pepsi Cola Commission. So that's the only one here that is higher than what we're anticipating for this year, but actually it includes an annual contribution or annual partnership amount of about $80-some thousand that we normally split with the athletic fund. But in light of the athletic fund getting additional money to their budget this year, they understand very well that they will not get half of that $80-some thousand. So we figured it made more sense for us to leave it in the auxiliary fund. So when you look at that total revenue, you're looking at a drastic decrease here in revenue. So almost like about $900,000. So that's a lot of money. And yet expenditures still have to be covered unless we decide to cut back on those expenditures. And so vehicle registration, this was Chief Ramirez's estimate of the basic expenditures that need to be covered. So we're talking about staff, obviously police officers that are patrolling the parking lots. We're talking here about making sure we have maintenance of the cameras, supplies to really basically cover the operation. And we asked him to please look over his expenditures, and this is what he has offered so far. Staff scholarship cannot be funded from any other fund but the auxiliary fund. So we have a budget of $300,000 to date. We expect to spend. To date, I think we had incurred about $279,000. Yet we do have a tuition increase that we need to consider. So we probably will, the $300,000 probably, if we decide to keep that budget as is, that would have to be funded. Did I hear a question? Okay. Memberships. So memberships, this is the membership that can only be funded by the auxiliary fund. This is what is paid to the Texas Association of Community Colleges. And that membership actually has two components, the membership itself to TACC, and then there is a Senate bill that requires that we break down any advocacy expense, so for lobbying. So this is actually based on a percentage of the total membership. So here we are looking at $18,000 for that next year. They will give us a new percentage to be applied to their total membership cost for the year. And then other expenses such as your utilities expense, that is a charge back from the general fund, from the operating budget. We are looking actually at decreasing that because it would make sense that the auxiliary fund does not get charged as much since there is really no use of the cafeterias right now. The bookstore has a limited, they do have a presence at Valle Verde, but they don't have a presence at other campuses. So just understand that if we do decrease that budget of $65,000, that means that the operating budget is going to have to absorb the difference because this is actually a charge back from our utilities budget in the general fund. And then we have various budget for our associations, and this is to help them obviously administer their activities as an association. So when you compare the total revenue of $501,791 to your total expenditures, before any transfers, we're already looking at a deficit in that fund of $340,000. And then we have a fund transfer to the plan fund that is funded mostly by the vehicle registration fund. And this is for the maintenance of our parking lot. And then we have this little windfall here, which is the loan repayment from the athletic fund. They've already earmarked a payment based on their budget. They're looking at a repayment about $243,000 to the auxiliary fund. So when you take all of this into consideration, we're still looking at a decrease in fund balance that is projected for next year about $422,000. Now, The good news is we do have a beginning fund balance of $2.2 million. And because it is an auxiliary fund, you certainly can use that, although it is not necessarily advised, because once you start chipping at that, then it's really hard to recoup. So we still would have a positive ending fund balance. So how do we propose to balance the budget in the auxiliary fund? So we can look at all of these options. There is not one that is necessarily preferred, although we, like I said earlier, we don't want to go into the fund balances as much as possible. But we could look at funding the revenue deficit in the vehicle registration by the CARES Act under the MSI. We could use the vehicle registration and auxiliary fund balances, as you saw that there was some capacity there. We could use a combination of vehicle registration fund balances and reduction in staff scholarship and educational assistance budget. I know I'm not going to be very popular here, but that is a consideration. We can postpone the transfers to the plan fund, which means I won't be very popular with Mr. Lobato because he counts on that money every year. And we know we have quite a few potholes to repair on our campuses. And like I said, it could be a combination of the above options. So by the time we come before you in August, at the end of August, we will have a proposed balanced budget that addresses the different options here. Are there any questions regarding?
This is Carmen. I have a question on what exactly is the advocacy expense? What does that entail?
So this is a term that we are using to describe lobbying expense. So according to a Senate bill, and I can't remember, was that 1495? I know there was a Senate bill. I can't remember the number of the Senate bill that was where now we have to disclose any kind of lobbying expense. So because TACC advocates for community colleges, and they do have a lobbyist that works there, Senator Shapiro. She is our lobbyist, and so any expense associated with that is part of the membership fee, but it has to be disclosed separately. So that's what this is.
Thank you. And the membership fees, it went down quite a bit. So what did we give up?
No, we did not give up anything, Dr. Graham. If you notice, the budget for membership fees is $81,000. And so when this was approved last year, we did not split it because we did not know how much the advocacy expense was going to be. So the total is still $81,000. So if you see, it's $63,000 for membership plus the $18,000. That's the $81,000 that we have budgeted for memberships in general to TACC.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any question on this particular slide? So next steps. So really we're here on the home stretch. Next steps for 2021 proposed budget. We have a lot of work to do between now and by the time we come before you with a proposed budget. And so we're going to continue our recruitment efforts, as you've heard. Obviously, this is a big consideration in terms of choosing the strategy that's going to work best for us in having a balanced budget. We're going to continue revising and refining our revenue projections. We need to finalize our baseline budget for additional potential salary savings. So by the time that we present to you that we look at a proposed budget, the baseline budget will have been most likely revised to include any retirements that are not included in what I just presented. Based on the projected enrollment drop and related budget strategy, we'll structure those budget reduction to balance the budget. So as I mentioned earlier, the amount that we need to cover the deficit, let's say under scenario 4, then we would work with our current budget to see how those budget reductions are going to be applied. And then we want to present a proposed budget for adoption at the August 26th board meeting. That is really the ultimate goal here. And so planning for adoption of the budget. August 7th, actually, the County of El Paso did approve the no new revenue tax rate, which has been published, by the way. It is on our website. We are obviously looking at August the 26th, if that's still the date, to adopt the budget by the Board of Trustees, for the Board of Trustees to consider the auxiliary fund. And then at the same time, because we are not looking at recommending a tax increase and having to hold a public hearing, having the adoption of the 2020 tax rate that will be based on the no new revenue tax rate. And then August 31st, Ms. Tellez and her staff are going to be very busy rolling the adopted budget into the banner system, because that is going to be the basis for our budget heads then to start expending as the fiscal year starts on September the 1st. And with that, I want to thank you so much for your attention, and certainly want to thank all the staff that you see here, but certainly thank the board, because really, you know, you've been very gracious, and it's very difficult. This is very complicated. I realize that this is probably the most complicated budget we've ever had to present to you. And I tell you honestly, I could not do this. I could not do this without, you know, this staff here. So we're talking about the budget office staff, the controller and accounting services, AVP Flores and the office staff, my own office, tremendous. You know, they are the ones that helped me with those presentations, along with Mr. Flores' staff, my division, because they've had to put up with me during this time, my cabinet colleagues and their respective division. We've worked very closely. And of course, Dr. Sedata. I would be very remiss not to thank Dr. Sedata for his support, but certainly to you, our Board of Trustees, thank you very much. Is there anything that I can address for you this evening?
So I really want to thank you for keeping this presentation under 15 minutes.
I have a question, Ms. Shaughnessy. I do have a question. So is the recommendation then for the board at our August 26th meeting, is it then to adopt the it's to adopt the no new revenue tax rate, right? But it'll be, I guess, for the current rate, and I guess for members of the public, this is a slight increase because of the property of appraisals. Is that correct?
No, because you see, our no new revenue tax rate is below the current rate, so it is not a tax increase.
Okay, so then the recommendation then, okay, no tax increase, right? And so then it doesn't trigger the hearings that we need to have then for that.
Exactly, Ms. Sanchez.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the recommendation. So there'll not even be an increase. I just want to make sure, because I know with these new terms, it's a little confusing. I know that I think the city is looking at a slight, well, I mean, there's no new revenue, but it's slightly above. I mean, so
it is.
It's just so that members of the public can understand, like, that there will possibly be an increase to their taxes, but that is, at least right now for today, that is not what we're recommending. At this point, we still have left to approve that on August the 26th, but that's not what we at least not looking at this point, correct?
That is correct, Ms. Sanchez. We are not looking at making any recommendation for increasing the tax rate above the no new revenue tax rate. It's taking a while to get used to that new terminology. Probably what I would pose to the board, though, is that would they like to have, certainly, so this is probably the most complicated budget presentation you're going to see in quite a while. We are hoping that in August, we can present to you a very revised, presentation. I don't know if what the board would like. Would you like, because, we're going to have a proposed budget that we would explain to you. We're going to have a balanced budget. And so I would like to hear if you want a 15 minutes presentation on the proposed budget, either as part of the board meeting or it is definitely, we are available to do whatever you wish us to do, whether we have something prior to the regular board meeting or for me to actually have a small presentation on the proposed budget and why at the regular board meeting.
I think that, this is Carmen, Nancy. I think that one of the reasons we moved this to a special board meeting was so that we could get a very detailed budget presentation, which you have delivered. And I think, in my opinion, we don't need a lot of detail anymore because we have these handouts, and we can go back to this. And if we have any questions, we'll call you prior to the meeting for clarification. But I'm very comfortable with you just making a brief presentation at the regular board meeting.
5 minutes, you said.
I do have a question, Ms. Rosen, on the next, where you have on your next steps for 2021 proposed budget. You have 5 items. And one of them is finalize the baseline budget for additional potential salary savings. Are you at liberty to share with us what that might entail just briefly? I know you're just considering something, but.
Sure, absolutely. So let me go back to show you what I mean by the baseline budget. Okay, let me go back to this one here. So this here is the current baseline budget by executive level. And let's say, for example, that between now and the time that we present, we have some staff, faculty and staff have submitted paperwork for retiring at the end of August. Then we would be reflecting, because what would happen is that, your incumbent salary is going to be higher than your baseline, salary. So really, we're looking at Ms. Tellez is signaling to me that she actually has right now 7 retirements, 7 employees that have submitted their paperwork for retirement. And so it's going to change that number because their salary is going to be higher than the baseline or the entry level salary for those positions. And so your total institutional account here, that baseline budget is going to be a little lower, which means it's going to give you a little bit more capacity to fund that deficit that we just talked about a while ago. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Anybody have any more questions for Ms. Shaughnessy? Thank you very much, Joseph. As usual, very precise and very educational.
Well, thank you so much for your attention. You've been most gracious. Thank you very much.
You and your team do a great job. Thank you.
Well, you've got to have a great team in order to get this done. Thank you.
Okay. Tell them that we appreciate all their hard work.
Budget hearing.
All right.
Been a budget all day.
Do we want to go into an executive session? Okay. Can you read?
Stop presenting.
The Board of Trustees conducts an executive or closed session pursuant to Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code for one or more of the following reasons. 1, consultation with an attorney to seek or receive legal advice or consultation regarding pending litigation or authorized by law. 2, discussion about the value or transfer of property. 3, discussion about a prospective gift or donation. 4, consideration of specific personnel matters. 5, discussion about security personnel. Or 6, discussion of certain economic matters. The board may also announce that it will go into executive session on any item listed on this agenda if the subject matter is committed for a closed session by provisions of Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code. Any vote regarding this item shall be taken in open session. Discussion with legal counsel regarding pending legal cases and attorneys pursuant to Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code.
So board members, you have the other phone number to dial Dr. Graham, did you want a 5-minute break before we do that? So if our board members can dial in at 7:40 p.m.
Okay, this is Dr. Graham, and we are back from executive session.
Ms. Bell, will you get a roll call and see who's here? Thank you, Dr. Graham.
Mr. Exter? Mr. Exter?
Structures here.
Mr. Exter?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Sanchez?
Here.
Mrs. Robles?
Present.
Ms. Nájera? Ms. Pina? Ms. Pina?
There she is.
Ms. Pina?
Hello, hello.
Thank
Hello?
you. We're just doing a roll call, Ms. Pina. Thank you. Dr. Graham? Present. And Mr. Haggerty?
Mr. Haggerty needed to leave the meeting. You have 5 members, Dr. Graham. They're here.
We have a quorum, so we have a motion to adjourn. The next meeting that we have on August 26th, I think Mr. Oster has a conflict, correct?
Correct. I have class that night.
Can we do the 25th, which is a Tuesday?
25 is fine with me.
Ms. Sanchez,
Yes.
the 25th is okay with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. And Ms. Robles?
Yes.
And I can do it too, so.
Ms. Pina?
We'll need Ms.
Yes.
Pina? Oh, great. So the only one we need to check with is Ms. Barney and the judge.
Okay.
Okay, so put it on your calendar, Tuesday, the 25th.
4 o'clock, we'll do facilities and finance, and then we'll have the regular board meeting at 5:30.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, thank you all for your input and all your participation, and we will see you or talk to you again on the 25th at 4 p.m. Do we have a motion?
So move that we adjourn.
Thank you all very much, members of the board.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Stay
Thank you.
safe.